Hi, everybody. Welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Bruce.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Well, today we have a long article, and it's called An Arctic Ocean Without Ice.
好，我们的中文标题是北极海冰可能比预期更快消失。这个英文标题当然就是一个北极海，但是没有冰的北极海。
Okay, I'll read through the whole thing. We have 3 long paragraphs here, and then as usual, we will go over each and every sentence for you. A recent study published in the journal Nature Communications has found that sea ice in the Arctic Ocean is expected to completely disappear during the month of September as early as the 2030s, roughly 10 years earlier than previous estimates. The authors of the study compared satellite images and climate models from 1979 to 2019 to come to this conclusion. Arctic sea ice typically follows a yearly cycle. During the winter, the ocean water freezes into ice as temperatures drop. Then, throughout the summer, portions of this ice melt with the warmer temperatures. Typically, the melting peaks in September before temperatures start to drop. Previous studies on the topic have indicated that September sea ice has been shrinking at a rate of 12.6% per decade. The potential disappearance of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean could have disastrous effects on the planet. Numerous Arctic animals, like polar bears, heavily rely on the sea ice for hunting. Furthermore, differences in ocean salt levels resulting from ice loss could substantially impact fish populations. In regard to the global climate, severe weather like heat waves, wildfires, and flooding could increase in many northern and mid-latitude places. Unfortunately, the study's authors noted that even if greenhouse gas emissions are considerably reduced, the Arctic could still see summers free of sea ice by the 2050s. Without sea ice, the Arctic Ocean will absorb more heat from the sun, causing a rise in water temperature. Consequently, the seawater will not be cold enough to produce significant amounts of ice in the winter when temperatures drop. Drastic actions will need to be taken to alleviate this impending crisis.
So, a recent study published in the journal, and the journal is called Nature Communications. That's why it's both capitalized and put into italics, italics being like the slanty letters. That is how you know that it's the title of a magazine. So a journal is a magazine, but it's usually for publishing more serious things like papers about medicine or the climate crisis. So this journal has found that sea ice in the Arctic Ocean is the one at the North Pole, it's expected to completely disappear. If something is expected to happen, it means we kind of depending on it to happen. You know, there's a translation problem. Usually what's the expected to in Chinese is translated to like 期待. But 期待 also means like looking forward to. It's like a happy meaning. And expected to is only the like this must happen kind of forceful meaning. Or like, yeah, it really is. If you're expected to do something, you must do it, okay? So it's a narrower meaning than 期待 in Chinese. So this is something that I think ESL students haven't quite really understood yet. So if something is expected to happen, it's going to happen, it must happen, it will happen. And what will happen is the ice will completely disappear during the month of September as early as the 2030s. This is bad. I mean, everyone knows this is bad. This is roughly 10 years earlier than previous estimates. So they thought this would happen in the 2040s, but no, it's going to happen earlier now. An estimate, by the way, is when people make a rough idea. They like make a rough guess as to what will happen.
好，所以这个句子呢，它的主词是 a recent study， 最近的一项研究。那这个研究是在哪里出版的呢？后面修饰一下 ，published in the journal Nature Communications， 就它是在这一个 journal， 就是一个学术期刊或者是一个期刊，自然通讯这个期刊里面所出版的一个 recent study。 好，那这个句子的动词在 has found that。has found that 就这个研究他发现说 sea ice 就是海冰 in the Arctic Ocean 北极洋的海冰 is expected to， 英文里面当我们说 A is expected to 做一个动作的时候，就是说 A 预期会发生或者会做这样的一个动作，通常它就是会做或者是会发生的意思。换句话说，他们发现说北极海的海冰预期将会 completely 完全的 disappear 消失，在9月消失，因为9月可能是这个夏季的靠近尾端了，所以在一个9月发生，那是在 as early as 就是早在，就是提早，就是这么早。本来为什么他会用 as early as？ 因为本来预期可能是2040年代才会发生，但是现在怎么样？已经提前，就是这么早就会发生了。多早呢？在2030年代就会发生了。啊，这个句子还蛮有趣的，就是2030几不知道，但就在2030年代的某一个9月，这件事情就会发生了。那这个日期呢，是 roughly 大致上是比之前的 previous estimates， 就是之前的一些预测、一些估计 estimate， 在这也是名词，就是估计或者预测。好，所以大约是比先前的预测还要早了10年，所以这个换句话说，状况很严重。
The authors of the study compared satellite images and climate models from 1979 to 2019 to come to this conclusion. So this explains the first paragraph. How is it expected to come sooner, and who's responsible for this, and so on? That's what this sentence is about. The authors of an article in Nature Communications, they studied a 40-year period, 79 to 1979 to 2019, and compared satellite images, which can see the whole North Pole area, the whole Arctic Ocean area, and climate models, which are based on those pictures, to make this conclusion.
Okay, so the authors of the study, 就这一篇研究，这一个研究的作者们，他们比较了 compared 比较了 satellite images 就是卫星的影像或者卫星的图像，还有比较了 climate models 就是气候的模型，从1979年到2019年的卫星的影像还有气候的模型。所以呢1979年到2019年的这些卫星图像啊，还有这个气候模型啊，然后呢才 come to this conclusion， 这是一个很好的 collocation 啊，就 come to a conclusion 就是得到了一个结论。所以他们是比较这些卫星图像还有气候模型这40年当中的这个卫星图像，然后呢才得到这个结论。
Arctic sea ice typically follows a yearly cycle, which makes sense because our planet's climate follows a yearly cycle and everything depends on that.
OK， 然后呢他们发现到说这个北极的海冰呢 typically 就是典型的，那其实它常常表示通常的意思，所以北极的海冰呢通常是 follows， 它会追寻着一个 yearly cycle， 就是年度的周期，它是以年为周期。
During the winter, the ocean water freezes into ice as temperatures drop. Now remember, we're talking about the northern hemisphere winter because the Arctic Circle, the Arctic Ocean are at the top of the world, if that's how you look at the globe. And as we would expect, the ocean water freezes in winter because the temperatures of the water and the air, they drop, they decrease.
好，所以呢，这里讲到说 during the winter， 在冬季的时候呢，就它以年度为周期嘛，所以每一年的冬天 ocean water 这个海洋的水呢会 freezes into ice， 会冻结成冰 freezes into ice。 那 as 就是随着 temperatures drop， 随着气温的下降。那各位注意到随着气温下降，中文这个气温我们根本不会去考虑它是单数还是复数，可是在英文里面呢，随着气温下降，这个 temperatures 通常是加 s 的，因为你气温下降的过程当中绝对不会只有一个温度，会有好多个温度，所以是复数的。
Then throughout the summer, portions of this ice, portions means parts or a small, like a small or large part of something. So portions of this ice melt with the warmer temperatures, which makes sense. Ice melts when it gets warm.
然后呢，冬天它会 freezes into water， 然后呢 throughout the summer， 在整个夏天当中呢 portions of this ice， portions 就是一个部分一个部分，所以就不止一个部分，也就各个你脑袋里面浮现就很多地方的一块一块的冰就怎么样呢，就 melt 融化了。With the warm temperatures， 随着 with 就是随着这个 warmer 不是 warm， 随着这些比较温暖的气温就融化了。那同样的这个地方 temperatures 也是要加 s， 因为温暖的气温不会只有一个气温。
Typically, the melting peaks in September before temperatures start to drop. Typically means usually in the average year, the melting of the sea ice peaks. It reaches its maximum amount, the greatest amount, in September. For us living where we are now, that's the end of summer and temperatures start to cool down after September.When temperatures start to drop, again, drop means decrease.
好 typically 就是通常跟前面那个 typically 一样，通常 the melting 就是冰融化这件事情，冰的融化 peaks 就是达到巅峰或者最高点 in September， 通常冰的融化到9月会到达最高点，然后呢before 就在什么什么之前，也就是说它会先达到最高点，然后再怎样。所以 before 在中文常常可以翻成接着，在这里这个 before 你就可以翻成接着，所以它这个9月的时候融冰到最高点，接着 temperatures 就 start to drop， 温度就开始下降， drop 就是下降。
So previous studies on the topic have shown us that September sea ice has been shrinking at a rate of 12.6% per decade. So a rate of shrinkage is not how much it's shrinking year to year, but how fast the shrinking is going on. So a 12.6 rate of shrinkage is astronomically high.
It's 1/8.
It's 1/8. We're losing 1/8 of sea ice every decade.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, and it's like not coming back is the point. That's why it's shrinking.Yeah. So, because normally it would melt and then it would come back. That's just how things were for, millennia. And now it's not coming back.
Yeah.
But so much of our planet depends on the sea ice being there, because here's the thing that scares me. If the sea ice isn't there, the Atlantic stops circulating. If the Atlantic stops circulating, Europe freezes. That happened once before. There was a summer where England never had a summer, and that's because just for no reason, the Atlantic stopped circulating that year, and there was no warm air brought up from the south. So this is what we're talking about, like the catastrophic effects of global warming.
所以呢，这个其实冰对全球的生态啊，还有各种活动都非常的重要。因为如果说冰变少，北极的冰变少的话，大西洋的这个海流的流动就会降低。那到时候呢，整个欧洲会变得非常的冷，因为从南方来的这个好的暖流什么就上不来了，所以这是很严重的问题。所以我们这里看到说 previous studies on the topic 就是在这个主题上面早先的一些研究 have indicated that 已经指出来了，这个9月的 sea ice 9月的海冰呢 has been shrinking 它已经一直在缩小了 at a rate of 的缩小的速率是 12.6%那 per decade 每10年大家不要觉得这个小一点点而已，这个其实是说地球的冰每10年就减少 1% 12.6%所以这个是很严重的一个问题。
Okay, next paragraph.The potential disappearance of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean could have disastrous effects on the planet. Potential means possible. In our case here, it's more likely that eventually, by the middle of this century, that sea ice in the Arctic Ocean could melt all that ice, and this would have terrible effects on the planet.
好 potential 是潜在的，而且是有可能发生的， disappearance 是消失，所以北极海的海冰它有可能会这么消失掉。那这样的一个事情呢 could 它可能 could 在这里表示可能会怎么样呢？可能会 have disastrous effects on 这也是一个很好的 chunk to have disastrous effects on something 就对什么有灾难性的影响 disastrous 就是灾难性的，所以北极海的冰的消失对于 the planet 就指地球可能会有灾难性的影响。
Numerous Arctic animals like polar bears heavily rely on the sea ice for hunting because that's how they get around. If there's no sea ice, there's no ground for them.
好 numerous 是许多的这个 Arctic animals 就是北极的动物呢，例如怎么样 polar bears 北极熊，那有很多的动物呢 heavily rely on 这是一个很好的也是常见的 collocation 就是深深地依赖，所以北极很多动物都深深地依赖 the sea ice 海冰，那为什么要依赖它呢 for hunting 因为他们打猎要有这个海冰他们才有办法打猎。
Furthermore, differences in ocean salt levels resulting from ice loss could substantially impact fish populations. So it's not only a question of how much sea ice there is. As ice melts into water, the amount of salt in the ocean in comparison will be reduced, and many fish populations depend on a certain steady amount of salt in the water around them, or they have to leave that area or they may die from that.
好，那此外 differences in ocean salt levels 所以 differences 就是差距不同，在海洋的 salt levels 就是盐分的程度就含盐量的差距可能，而且这含盐量的差距是怎么样来的，是 resulting from ice loss 是冰层的消失，所以冰层的消失 resulting from 是由什么所导致，所以由冰层消失所导致的海洋的盐分的差距的不同呢，可能会 substantially 就是 to a great extent 就是会相当程度的会很严重的 impact 或 impact 在这里都可以，因为它是动词，会影响到 fish populations，那这里指的是鱼类的族群 population 本来可以指数量，但这个地方这 populations 比较是跟 groups 比较接近的意思，所以就是不同的鱼类的族群会受到影响，因为融冰就等于把这个海水的盐分把它稀释掉了，那盐分减少，那很多的鱼群就会受到影响。
And in regard to the global climate, if you say in regard to or with regard to, you mean you're talking about the relationship to this thing. So in terms of the relationship to the global climate, severe weather like heat waves, wildfires, and flooding could all increase in many northern and mid-latitude places because of the lack of sea ice.
Well, and we've seen that this year in Canada and in the U.S., more wildfire. There are always wildfires in North America, but this year there were many, many more than usual. And my grandchildren sent me pictures of Syracuse, New York.
Wow.
And the sky is orange in the middle of the day.
I mean, my mom lives in Wisconsin, and she's been talking about how the snowpack was much less this year. So the amount of snow that fell, that, you know, because the snow sits on the ground and it slowly soaks in over time, and that's a great source of groundwater, right? So the snowpack, the amount of snow sitting around on the land was much less this year.
Wow.
And they had very little rain in the spring. She's like, everything is dry.
Wow.
And she's like, this is bad. And this is what she was telling me before the wildfires started. And so when the wildfires started, I was like, well, crap, because we got a dry spring and we had good growth last year, which means there's lots and lots of stuff to burn and it's dry.
Wow, 好，所以这个 Bruce 老师跟这个 Angela 老师他们在美国的家人都有可以证实气候的转变实在非常的严重，而且这个加拿大那个野火，这个今年那个野火非常的厉害。
Actually, I was looking at a YouTube video from a woman who she travels around China. She's Chinese and she travels around China. And she's been showing northern China recently. And every time she shows a reservoir, it is like several meters too low. All of the reservoirs and rivers she shows. Like she's just showing the landscape, but I'm looking at like the amount of dry land around each reservoir going, crap.
Yeah, 所以这个干旱也是一个大问题。好，所以呢 in regard to 就是 about concerning 关于这个全球气候呢Severe weather 就是恶劣的天气，就好像怎么样，就恶劣天气所造成的一些状况，例如说 heat waves 这个热浪 wildfires 这个野火，还有 flooding 还有这个洪水呢，可能会 increase 会增加，在很多中纬度的地方这个都会增加。
Okay, next and last paragraph. Unfortunately, the study's authors noted that even if greenhouse gas emissions are considerably reduced, the Arctic could still see summers free of sea ice by the 2050s. So sadly, we got some bad news for you folks. The study's authors, those who studied this problem, they specifically warned people basically that if greenhouse gas emissions are considerably reduced, they're being reduced now, then the Arctic could still see summers free of sea ice. That means no more sea ice in the Arctic Ocean during the summer by the 2050s, which is a couple decades from now.
好 ，unfortunately， 很不幸的，研究的作者们 noted， 是他们指出 ，even if 即使温室气体的 emissions 排放 are considerably reduced， 相当大地减少了 ，reduce 就减少了，即使是温室气体的排放大大的减少了，那北极仍然可能会 see 就是 experience， 它仍然会看到会经历到一些夏天是 free of sea ice， 是没有海冰的夏天。那什么时候这样的事情会发生呢？是在2050年代之前就会发生这样的事。
Without sea ice, what will happen is the Arctic Ocean will absorb more heat from the sun. If you absorb something, you take it in. So without the ice to cool it, the Arctic Ocean will get hotter. So it will absorb more heat from the sun, causing a rise in water temperature, which means it will get hotter.
好，然后呢，这个如果没有海冰的话，北极洋它就会怎么样？就会 absorb， 会吸收更多的热，从太阳的热它会吸收更多，因为没有冰，那就会造成水温 water temperature 的一个上升 a rise.
Consequently, as a result of this rise in water temperature, the seawater will not be cold enough to produce significant amounts of ice in the winter when temperatures drop. Even though temperatures are dropping, they're not dropping enough, so the Arctic Ocean could be too warm to make ice.
好，那结果这个海水呢就没有办法冷到足以产生 significant amounts of， 就是大量的数量足够的这个冰 in the winter， 在冬天就没有办法产生大量的冰。当冬天这个气温下降的时候，它产生的冰就不够了。
Drastic actions will need to be taken. Drastic means very extreme. In order to do what? To alleviate or make it better, or at least make it less worse. To alleviate this impending crisis. Impending means coming soon to a continent near you.
Yeah, 所以 drastic actions 这是常见的 collocation. Drastic 就是很强力的、很严厉的 extreme， 甚至于是极端的这个一些行动呢 will need to be taken， 必须要采取。这个 taken 或者 take 的受词是那个 actions。那采取强而有力的一些这个步骤，目的才能怎么样呢？ Alleviate 就是减轻 ，to make less intense 的意思，让什么东西比较减轻呢？让这个 impending 就是马上要到的 ，to be about to happen 的意思，马上要到了这个 crisis 这个危机，我们才能够把它降低一下这个危机的这个严重程度。
Okay, we have a few questions for you based on today's article, the first of which is, which of the following is true about the study mentioned in the passage?
好，关于本文提到的研究，以下哪项是正确的？
The answer is D. This study found that Arctic sea ice will disappear much earlier than previously thought.
好，答案是 D。他发现北极海冰将会比先前想象的更早消失。
Number 2, what is the annual pattern of sea ice in the Arctic? How does sea ice ebb and flow during the year?
好，题目问说，北极地区海冰的年度周期模式是什么呢？
The answer is C. Ice forms in the winter and then melts in the summer.
答案是 C， 冰在冬季形成，然后在夏季融化。
And number 3, what is one effect a lack of sea ice will have on the planet?
缺乏海冰对于地球产生什么样的影响呢？
Well, A is your best answer here. Flooding is more likely to happen. There will be more rainfall. There will be less control of normal temperatures and cloud patterns and atmospheric conditions, which could lead to more and more rain.
好，所以答案是 A， 洪水更有可能会发生。
Well, that's it for today's lesson. We'll be back. You can't get rid of us that easily. We will be back in a couple of days. Until then, bye-bye.